You're listening to The Reality Check, episode 394, recorded on March 22nd, 2016.
This is your reality check.
Hi everyone, and welcome to The Reality Check, your weekly Canadian podcast that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. I'm your host, Darren McKee, and with me, as usual, are Adam Gardner.
What's up, cuboids?
Cristina Roach.
Hello.
And Pat Roach.
Hi, everyone.
We have a great show for you today. We are finally going to get to talking about Neil deGrasse Tyson. Pat and Cristina give us an overview of their experiences with a talk he gave. Then Adam is going to talk about when Easter is. I've heard it's coming up.
Maybe.
But first, I'm going to talk to you about money and happiness. Money can't buy happiness is a phrase you often hear, but it certainly seems like rich people have a lot of fun. Have you seen Instagram? And most people feel financial constraints, which cause them unhappiness.
Yeah.
Yet, we can all imagine situations where money can't make things better. As well, most things are subject to diminishing returns. Why would accumulating money be any different? Now, as some background, people often misunderstand or poorly estimate what makes them happy in the first place and how happy they would be in other situations. We've heard of the famous stories of lottery winners not being much happier year after their winnings. So what is the answer? Happily, for me at least, as I was compiling research for this segment, I found a longer piece of analysis by 80,000 Hours about the issue. What I am now presenting is mostly a summary of that piece, which can be found at 80,000hours.org by Rob Wiblin.
So, Darren, I feel an effective altruism segment coming on.
Only near the end. Okay. 80,000 Hours is an effective altruism organization, but it's actually just they took the time to look at the research of money and happiness. Yes, 80,000 Hours focuses on what you should do with your career, but it was really just, in general, what do people think about? And then at the end, they do talk about career and other things. The piece starts by questioning conventional wisdom, and that by stating in the 70s and 80s, it was thought there was no relationship between income and life satisfaction. But they've also found that as you get richer, you need a lot more money to make you more satisfied. But apparently there's no maximum level of income beyond which more would not make you even more satisfied. It doesn't seem there's an amount that's too much that couldn't increase your happiness at least a little. Okay? So you make $1 million? Okay, here's $100 million. I'm slightly happier. It doesn't stop.
Are you 100 times happier?
So you can picture a curve almost approaching an asymptote. They said the best study they could find was one by famous economists Justin Wolfers and Betsy Stevenson, and it draws on polling data from hundreds of thousands of people in 166 countries, and found that people in richer countries reported being more satisfied with their lives than those in poorer countries, and that within a country, richer people reported being more satisfied than those with lower incomes. This study used self-reported well-being and self-reported income. Now, you can't see the lovely figure, which you could find in our notes at trcpodcast.com, but income is along the x-axis, the bottom, and well-being is along the y-axis, the one that goes up and down. And there are about 14 lines representing 14 countries. There are various lengths, but they are all diagonal, and they're all going towards the top right from the bottom left. Which means, as income increases, so does subjective well-being.
Wow.
Now, the x-axis is actually a logarithmic scale.
Oh, that's the trick.
The lines are straight rather than curved because each increment on the bottom of the axis indicates a doubling of income. Okay? So, in general, doubling your income increases life satisfaction 0.5 units out of 10.
Out of 10.
So it's not necessarily a lot unless you actually might think it's a lot, depending on how you look at the world. Here's a quote. According to the survey data, a typical person with a household income of $2,000 rates their life satisfaction at around 4.2 out of 10. A typical person with a household income of $64,000 rates their life satisfaction at 7.2 out of 10.
Yeah.
So you can picture that 2,000 doubled many times led to those increases. Now, of course, correlation is not causation. God, we know. Stop bringing it up. Let's see if there's anything else. What about other measures of life satisfaction? And here they talk about, well, think about all the different ways you could try to measure something like happiness or life satisfaction.
Yeah, very different.
So other studies have shown that people in richer countries were more likely to recall feeling enjoyment or love yesterday and less likely to experience depression or physical pain, despite being older. There's many different little charts here, 12 to 20 of them in the paper. The 80,000 Hours piece also states that people in richer countries were also a bit more likely to report being consistently treated with respect, having good tasting food, smiling or laughing a lot, and being free to choose how they spend their time. These are the things you can think about. How do you measure life satisfaction? Yet, if you raise income 16-fold from 2,000 to 32,000, this moved reported happiness from 3.0 out of 4 to 3.3 out of 4. A 64-fold increase in income from $500 to $32,000 increased the probability of recalling feeling enjoyment or eating tasty food yesterday from around 60 to 80%.
Okay.
On the other hand, a 64-fold increase in income only raised the likelihood of feeling love yesterday from 63 to 73%. All this to say is that things are going up and you are getting gains, but dramatic increases in income are not increasing the reported behaviors increasing that much.
Yeah.
And so, Darren, are we talking, at what scale are we talking? We're not talking about North America, we're talking about the world. Like,
this is world.
These things are vastly different depending on where you are, correct?
Well, what I was trying to say is that within a country it matters as well. So say even in the United States, it's basically approximately true that if you made 32 grand in the United States and then you made 64 grand, your happiness would only go up 0.5.
Okay.
Just like all the other ones. But what they're doing in these numbers are, yes, they're looking overall across all peoples.
Well, it's just hard for me to wrap my head around a $2,000 annual income. Yeah, you wouldn't eat in.
Well, right. No, your happiness certainly plummet. They didn't look at what would happen if you did in reverse, which I think would be dramatically complicated.
But there are just countries where a certain income is so below the cost of living that you're just trying to be.
That's a decent question. So I'm not quite sure if the numbers are in purchasing power parity, but I do know that when you read about people living on $1.25 a day, that is adjusted to American numbers. They actually mean like $1.25 American.
Maybe I'm burying the lead, but there's probably some threshold where you're eating and you have shelter, and then beyond that.
That's kind of where this is going.
Okay.
That's generally what people think, and that what is that number though? And can you actually determine what it is that generalizes to any meaningful context?
Yeah.
So I just wanted to raise these points about life satisfaction because, as you can see, things get quite complicated when you have these different measures. These results will mean different things to different people, as they may hold some criteria above others. Maybe for you, life satisfaction, you don't care that much about tasty food, but you do really care about feeling love or other types of things like that. It really just depends on the individual. Another general point is that it is uncertain exactly what the happiness scale is like. Is it like weight, where an increase of 1 kilogram is the same no matter where you are in the scale? From, say, 51 kilograms to 52 kilograms versus 100 kilograms to 101 kilograms? Or is it more complicated, and it's not quite like a ratio? Maybe it's not even consistent, that maybe going from 8 units of happiness to 8.5 is a large jump compared to 4.5 to 5.
Yeah.
It's not quite certain. Now, why might these large changes in income not move the ratings much? Well, aside from more money, more problems, which explains everything, more money usually means you have less time to do other things because you were maybe working to get that money, depending on how you look at things.
Yeah.
Additionally, we know there's the concept of the hedonic treadmill, which is that you can do things which increase your happiness in more of a shorter term sense, but then you have to keep doing more and more to get the same level of happiness in terms of that effect. Now, there's a further complication overall highlighted in the piece, which is that if someone asks you whether you're in physical pain, it's easy to check and give a meaningful answer. Someone calls you up, hey, you in pain? You're like, yes, no. It's relatively straightforward. But if someone asks you on the phone how satisfied you are with your life, all things considered, on a scale of 1 to 10, it can be hard to say. As you don't really know how satisfied you are on average, you have to answer quickly. And people are inclined to substitute a related question that is easier to answer. A natural option is, how much money am I making relative to others? How well is my career going? How do I feel today? And this is a widely observed phenomenon. It's called attribute substitution by psychologists. When our brains are confronted with a difficult question, sometimes we substitute another one in its place without quite realizing it. Confounding variables are also an issue. For instance, maybe healthier people are both happier and able to earn more because they have more energy.
Yeah.
Or maybe happiness increases your income rather than the other way around, because happier people make better colleagues. So all these things that I've been saying may be interesting, but is there anything causal? Well, remember those lottery winners? Well, it turns out they actually were happier. They reported their happiness as 4 out of 6, compared to 3.82 for the control group. Now, I remember reading this about 6 months ago, and this study is included in Rob Williams' overall analysis, and it was one of those lessons that always read the original study. Because we've heard a long time, the lottery winners, they were just as happy a year later. It's like, no, if you look at the study, they never even said that. They just said they weren't a lot happier.
So where did that misconception about the study even come from?
Oh, in the same way they always come from. I don't know. Someone wrote it up. It wasn't a large enough difference. I know when Dan Gilbert has given these presentations, he said it hasn't changed much. And in the data that he presents visually, you can see that it's changed a little, but not much.
Yeah.
And I think that's just become not much, not a lot, not at all, changed over time.
Terrible.
Now, it was only a sample of 22 in that study, and the original authors did make a big deal about it because it's only 22. But apparently, as Adam indicated, it's too good a story to not tell. You may have also heard about the paper which said something similar but opposite about paraplegics, that they looked at their happiness rating, then they had this incident happen to them which decreased their livelihood and mobility, and then a year later they're about just as happy as they were. And this is not true either, in the same way but opposite. Paraplegics actually rated their general happiness as 2.96, which is much lower than the others.
Yeah.
Once again, try to read the original study. Now, there have been more recent studies that had larger sample sizes with these lottery winners, and they've generally found that lottery winners seem to be a little better off. Unfortunately, it's hard to say much because 1, samples are still pretty small, 2, the winnings are often also small, and 3, the outcome measures all differ from one to another, as from the papers above. It's not usually the case where you can get a large enough sample, look at everyone in the exact same way, then one of them wins the lottery, and then you can go back to that person.
So you have to actually ask them before and after they win the lottery.
You'd have to, yes.
That's very difficult.
Yes, it would. And you'd have to, again, to get the large enough sample size, right?
Yeah.
So based on all this research, though, it does seem to say that money makes you happier. In some causal sense, even if it's just a little. Are there any exceptions, though? Well, if you really like money, and that is a top priority, chances are it's going to make you even happier to have more of it. So while I said, like, doubling your income was only going to increase your happiness a little, perhaps if you love money, it'll do a lot more than that. Similarly, if you really don't care about money, doubling your income will probably have less of an effect, right? As well, if you have many financial dependents, you can obviously see that money would probably help you more. This is kind of getting to that are your basic needs taken care of thing that Pat hinted at.
So you'll have a high level of unhappiness if your dependents are not able to eat properly or be taken care of.
Exactly. So I'm pretty sure, if you look at the basic needs, that stuff, once that's met, it's usually beyond that, then what? But if you have more dependents, there's a lot more people with basic needs, which is why it costs more.
Yeah.
Also in this review on 80,000 hours, they asked whether other things mattered more than income. Well, Ball and Chernova did a study that calculated for the median single individual, the happiness boost produced by marriage is matched only by a 667% increase in absolute income.
Wow.
Or by an increase in relative income from the 50th to the 88th percentile. Now, of course, this all depends, as Adam can speak to if he desires. But the point is that many marriages aren't so happy, and they end terribly.
Yeah, there's a considerable drop in happiness if your marriage ends poorly. And there's a decrease in money, so...
It depends is the short story.
Yeah.
Ball and Chernova also found that there was a large increase regarding health. On a 1 to 5 scale, moving from a health rating of 3 to 4 is matched only by a 6,500% increase in absolute income, or by a move from the 50th to the 100th percentile in relative income. These numbers seem a bit odd to me, as they may to you, because once you move from 50th to 100th, you've moved to better than everyone else that exists. Yeah. And maybe if you were 3 on a health scale and someone offered you $10 billion, it still wouldn't make you as happy as this implies. So I just think that's just to show that's a dramatic increase of other things that aren't quite related to money. And as we said, in some cases, you cannot buy more health with your money. Although often you really can. But in some cases you can. So all that aside, one last part is what does this mean for yourself and how you can have a positive impact on the world. Hey, 80,000 Hours is an effective altruist organization, Pat, so how could I not mention this? Mm-hmm. In short, as you may be able to understand, money goes much further in poorer countries. So if you are in dire poverty, obviously more money will improve your life more. As well, if the logarithmic scale I mentioned above for the relationship between income and satisfaction is accurate and at least partially causal, you would need 50 to 100 times as much money to increase the satisfaction and happiness of an educated American as that of someone in the poorest billion people.
So if I want to decrease my happiness level by 0.5, I would get enough money to increase so many more happiness levels by 0.5 at lower ends of the scale.
Oh, yes. It would be staggering if you took a halving of income, yes. Or you could take, the loss of 1 to 5%, which you probably wouldn't notice, depending on who you are, and that would dramatically increase the lives and the happiness of others. Now, in general, you'll notice that all the research I presented, it still isn't as rigorous as one might hope. And that's just because this realm of research is very hard to do in a way that provides useful characterizations and generalizes to others. I've heard the 75,000 figure, that once you have 75,000, everything above that, it doesn't really make a difference. And that is only generally true. As I said, the more money you make, your life satisfaction seems to keep going up no matter what. It just gets smaller and smaller in some sense. As a qualifying factor, it also depends where you live, of course. Because other people have said, well, around 40,000 is fine. But if you live in a really expensive city, 40,000 doesn't even cover rent well, as well as just basic living costs. Yeah. So that's a factor there. Yeah. So it could be that if you had some sort of generalized notion corresponding to or proportional to the living standards of the area, maybe it's that once you have 10 or 15 grand extra, a little for savings, a little for leisure and luxury, that's going to be close to where your happiness plateaus unless you structure your life differently, regardless of money.
Did you find any research that talked about potentially differences in the level of happiness that wealth brings to men versus women? Because it seems like men will prioritize money more in their career aspirations, and I wonder if that's something that is reflected in sort of how they feel about that money, or if this is just a drive that doesn't make sense.
That's an excellent question. No, I did not look into that. I wonder if it exists. I'm tempted to say it does. That is more likely to be the case. Mm-hmm. And it could be that because men associate resources with an increase in status more so than women do. And that could be partially because women are more attracted to men who have more resources.
Sure. So status leads to happiness, and then therefore it's
related in that sense.
Indicator of status.
I shouldn't say men don't care about a woman's resources in the financial sense. It's probably just that women tend to care more than men do.
Okay.
I think we all realize that no amount of money could match the happiness we're going to experience when Pat and Cristina finally talk about Neil deGrasse Tyson. It's priceless.
So we've been talking about this for a few weeks, and Cristina and I went to see Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson do a lecture titled The Cosmic Perspectives here in Toronto. He started by asking the crowd if we wanted him to cover a new topic up front and suggested a few different topics. And they were like gravitational waves, Pluto not being a planet anymore, what about this Planet 9 thing? And by applause, we chose gravitational waves. And I thought that was actually one of the more interesting parts of his talk. And he spoke for 3 hours, so I don't know how much we're going to be able to cover. But he explained basically that Einstein had predicted gravitational waves in 1916 on the basis of his theory of general relativity. And this is probably something that we should actually cover on the show at some point. But the short story is these are ripples in the curvature of space-time that propagate as waves. And then he got into how they actually detect it, and that it had to be these like super minute changes in these lasers. I thought that that was actually quite fascinating. He did it mostly like off the cuff. Mm-hmm. And then he gave sort of several historical perspectives on how science has evolved. And I guess I would sum things up as him trying to inspire the audience to be awed and humbled by our place in the universe, as well as to invest in the idea of discovery and the idea of like scientific discovery. And he started with this new tree of life. Have you guys seen this on the internet?
Nope.
Neither had I, but scientists at 11 institutions collaborated to create this diagram which depicts the relationship among living things as they diverge from one another over time, tracing back to the beginning of life more than 3.5 billion years ago. He then zoomed into the human's place in this tree, which was humbling indeed. I've linked to an image of it in the show notes. He talked for 3 hours, so we can really only touch on this, but to see this tree of life and to see how small our place is in this was something to see.
Yeah, very humbling. There were times where I think you literally could hear people's brains go poof. Mm-hmm. He'd say something and you could feel that in the crowd, that reaction from people, that their minds were just blown a little bit. But further to the tree of life thing, He specifically talked about rats and mice and their proximity to Homo sapiens on the tree. And if you go check out that diagram, you'll see that. And he talks about, since their genetic, biological, and behavior characteristics closely resemble those of humans, this is why they're used in scientific research. Which, I know it seems like an obvious thing, but just the way he explained it, I thought was really interesting. A lot of people seem to, a light bulb went off, I guess. One common theme is he's pretty sad about the state of affairs in the U.S. on a couple of levels. like when he talks about the science of evolution and theory of natural selection, and how sad it is that over 40% of Americans, I think that was the statistics, reject that, despite the fact that majority of Europeans and other people accept the theory regardless of their religious affiliations, which is interesting. And just how dismal the U.S. is doing in math and science in comparison to countries like South Korea and Japan, which seem to really be excelling in those fields, and the decline of scientific research in the U.S. And one thing he touched upon, which was really interesting, was bad math and bad engineering. And he talked about, we've heard a lot of stories in the news of bridges collapsing and, that crane collapsing. And he talks about, during Hurricane Katrina was the fatal engineering flaws in New Orleans' flood protection system that resulted in such catastrophic flooding.
Right. He was quite convincing that it was not about the weather, but in fact it was an engineering flaw.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And just interesting, like these cool little things, like he showed photos of elevators in different floors in the U.S. versus Europe, and how in the U.S., elevators leave off floor 13. It goes from floor 11, 12 to 14. And in Europe, they don't do that. And even the lower floors are distinguished by
minus one. So the basement floor would be -1.
Whereas in the U.S., it's, LL or, mezzanine or something. There it's -1, -2. And it was just really interesting to...
Now, do you think that lack of a 13th floor gives them an advantage over us in the States of Canada?
In what way, Darren?
Well, they have an extra floor, obviously.
Right,
so
right. True.
You don't have all that wasted space.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just hanging out.
For ghosts and monsters.
One last thing that I found really fascinating was he got into the golden age of Islam, and he was recently... Was it in Dubai, Bud, that he was talking about the space...
Yeah, in Dubai, yes.
He was at a conference speaking there and talking about the scientific advancements in that part of the world. But he talks about the golden age of Islam, and how back in the day Baghdad was a hotbed of science with all faiths coming to the table to discuss ideas, and how algebra and algorithm are Arabic words, and how Muslims were once on the forefront of math and science and medicine, and then how independent reasoning was lost as religious conservatism took over. And I thought that was fascinating and controversial, right?
Sorry, I think he's actually been criticized on this recently, but to watch him present on it was fairly compelling and quite interesting.
So when you say he's been criticized, does that mean his presentation was maybe more dazzle than accuracy?
No, just specific to his comments about the golden age of Islam and
Right.
and Islamic scholars. One in particular, I don't remember his name.
Yeah.
But he does bring up a really interesting statistic. He talks about how Jewish people make up only 0.2% of the world's population, and they win an astonishing 22% of Nobel Prizes.
Wow.
Yeah, heard that one.
In contrast, there's only been 2 Nobel-winning Muslim scientists, although they're about 20% of the world population. So they generate less than 5% of the science, according to him. So,
and of course, why that is the big sticky question.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, what I would say to sum up is that he is a really great speaker, and his enthusiasm for science is infectious. And there was a crowd of all different age groups. There were kids, there were. I think the woman sitting next to me was probably in her 80s, and he played up to everybody. I think everyone took something away from it. So a really fun evening, well spent. If he's coming to a town near you, go see him.
Cool. Sounds like it would have been better than Interstellar.
Mm-hmm.
Ouch. I enjoyed that movie. But,
well, that explains a lot.
It does potentially.
Ouch! Certainly some might see Neil deGrasse Tyson as a spiritual experience, and other people, well, they'll just rely on God, related to Easter. I'm not sure when Easter is, but I know I have a holiday soon. Adam, when am I going on holidays?
Easter Sunday is March 27th this year, which to us recording is in 5 days, and to you listening is probably anywhere from a few days from now to today or sometime in the distant past.
Covering the bases.
The date of Easter moves from year to year, so just how is it determined? First, I'll ask the panel, and I hope you didn't read ahead. How do you think the date of Easter Sunday is determined? Darren, we'll start with you, because you're right here.
Sure. First answer is I don't know. Secondly, I thought it had to do with a certain number of Sundays after something else. Spring? March? Usually Easter's always in April, so I'm actually surprised it is in March. So obviously whatever system I had didn't make that much sense.
Cristina, how do you think Easter is determined?
It doesn't have something to do with pagan holiday of some kind or seasons, solstice. I'm not sure.
All good ideas. Pat?
Yeah, I have no idea. I would echo Darren or Cristina in terms of suggestions, but no clue.
So I had no idea how it was determined myself. I simply had the idea that it was complicated. So in my mind, I knew it had something to do with the moon and suspected that Lent came into it with some sort of 40-day period where people were in the desert being involved, or one guy in the desert, I guess.
With chocolate eggs.
Yeah. Well, it turns out, as was explained to me by a woman I work with, it's really simple. The first Sunday after the first full moon in spring.
Okay, so yeah.
So it does relate to the seasons.
Yeah. More specifically, it's the first Sunday after the first full moon after the March Equinox. The March Equinox is the day when the sun shines directly on the equator and the length of night and day are nearly equal. So this date can move and is generally on March 19th, 20th, or 21st every year. So, real easy to calculate if you know when the full moon will be. You can check the phases of the moon on your calendar. You can also check the Easter date on that same calendar.
Why do math when it's already there?
So if the full moon is on the Sunday, then Easter is delayed by 1 week. So if the first full moon full moon in spring is on a Sunday, 1 week later. Between the years 1753 and 2400, Easter is at the earliest on March 22nd and at the latest on April 25th. All of the other dates around Easter, such as Palm Sunday, Good Friday, Ascension Day, all revolve around that date. I thought it was the other way around. I thought maybe, Ash Wednesday came first, something like that, but that's not really how it works. So that's about it. What about these Orthodox people you hear so much about? They have different days for Easter because they use it based on the Julian calendar. So this year it's Sunday, May 1st. They don't follow the Gregorian calendar like the one on your wall. Well, that's not really true. They probably follow the Gregorian calendar for, going to their job and, subway schedules and things like that. But for Easter, they use the Julian calendar. That's old school. So that date is generally a bit later. So using the range of the years 1763 to 2336, the earliest is on April 3rd and the latest is on May 10th. But these dates seem to keep drifting with time because, there's a problem with the Julian calendar. That's why we observe the Gregorian calendar now, because it has leap years and a bunch of fun stuff to take care of problems. So, why this date in the first place? So it used to be based on the first Sunday following Passover, which is on the 14th of the Jewish month Nisan. But as the month-moon cycle was out of sync, sometimes Jewish feasts are held on liturgical moons, when the moon is not actually full, and rabbis announced when Passover would be celebrated. So to make it easier, and not to have rabbis dictating the time of a Christian holiday, they just picked the first Sunday after the Paschal full moon, the first full moon after the spring equinox. Easter is the first Sunday after the first full moon after the March equinox. You can also find the date on your calendar or by Googling it. This year, March 27th.
Bam.
It's interesting how all of us had to kind of guess. We had a bit of an idea, but
I just assumed it was so much more complicated than that.
Right, but it does manage to weave in, season, and then moon, and then date.
yeah.
Yep.
Thanks, Adam. And thank you, listeners, for joining us once again. Today I gave you some information about money and happiness, where the more money you have, you do seem to be happier, and this will keep happening, but the increases you get from large increases in money may not be that great. That Neil deGrasse Tyson is a very entertaining and intelligent presenter who, if you have a chance, go check him out. And finally, Adam told us when Easter is. And the short answer is March 27th this year.
Yeah, it's this Sunday.
Until next time, think better, act better.
Peace out, Q-Woods.
Stay classy, not smartassy.
Apologies to Neil deGrasse. Oh, wait, actually, we talked about it.
The Reality Check is an independently Canadian-produced podcast. For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at TRC_podcast.
Outtakes.
And Pat Roach.
Well, hi, everyone.
We have a great show for you
I
today.
sounded surprised. Oh, hi, everyone.
Oh, hi there. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, hi.
Did you want to retake that, Pat?
I will retake that because, I'm on a podcast?
Easter is at the earliest on March 22nd and at the latest on April 25th.
Fifth.
Oh, no, that again?
Oh, no.
25th.
Nope.
5th.